So one of the things you asked me was what my main teaching points
Mhm.
or other perspectives on the institute um, that were important to me. And so, first of all, it was interesting because we had like um, 50 people signed up for the institute,
Mhm.
and I was the only educator.
Ah, okay.
So it was a very, and usually we have sort of a, so this is the seventh uh, institute that I've directed or
Yeah.
co-directed. So I have pretty much experience, I can kind of compare and see how they're different. And so it was really interesting to see how this one immediately was really critical for therapists to sign up for, while educators apparently didn't think it was really that important to them. And I could see how they could think that, but I was disappointed because I think educators need to know everything a therapist knows, because they're the ones that need to know how to refer people,
Right.
how to educate them and tell them about concepts that are important in the history of the concept and how it all works, and help them see their whatever problems they have in their perspective, in an up-to-date perspective. So as an educator, I'm really interested in how everything we know and learn, um, everything is culturally mediated, is the social processes come in there. So I became immediately interested in thinking about sex addiction. What is it, and why is it such an issue today? And why are we choosing to see it in the way we see it? So either as kind of like a disease, like I have the flu, or the way the faculty, I would say that our faculty was seeing it, which is, it's like sex itself. It's a language, and it is expressing many different things, and you can't just, sort of translate that language literally. You need to see what's behind the expression. It might be depression, it might be grief, it might be OCD, it might be, any number of things. And so it's really important to see it more as a language than as a rock or a stone or a flu. So we had a movie night in order to try and get those points across. And uh, and I used two concepts to do that. One is a concept called the wild zone, and a couple of anthropologists came up with that term to understand how culture is always in a state of conflict. So very much like, we all know that there's this conflict between those who don't believe in sex addiction and those who are addictionologists. And so I think it's really important to see that we're all just like any kind of change, where there's all this flux and conflict. And so the context zone is a term from geology. Uh, excuse me. So first I was talking to you about the wild zone. So the wild zone looks at society as having sort of a dominant culture, and then muted cultures whose realities don't find expression in the dominant culture so much. So you and I are women. We know very much we live in a man's world, and when our own sexuality is mediated by how men think sex should be, but they only have their experience, really. So most of them don't really get how we experience sex, and they think that it's really up to them to wield that penis in such a way that we have pleasure, when really that's not the main source of our pleasure. And so with sex addiction, I I think that the term comes from sex negative people, religious kind of points of view, that sex is bad, it's a source of problem, and who people who are characterized as sex addicts, some of them are truly troubled, but some of them, they are just very sex positive people with maybe much higher libidos than the average person.
Yeah,
And
or a different expression of their own sexuality that's different
yeah,
than what other people think it should be.
yes. So most of the films clips we saw clips from 10 films, and then we were just trying to see if the audience, if they had accounts of scenes like that from clients, and what did we think of them, and how did we understand them. And so most of them were represented the addictionologist point of view, and that is the more popular point of view. We have celebrities that are sex addicts, and
All over the media.
and yes, and so that's a way we love to hear about that. Now, recently, we've heard about, is it Wiener or Weiner? Wiener,
Yeah.
and his new sex addiction expression, um, which is a really narrow way of looking at what it is.
Yeah, well, and with that whole, scandal in the recent news that now he's addicted to sexting. I mean, you just call anything an addiction, right?
Well, and the idea that sexting is terrible.
Yeah.
Actually, there's some new literature out that talks about how wonderful sexting is, that young people, however, just need to be taught how to do it more safely and in ways that won't hurt them.
Mhm.
Uh, but everybody is just like, oh my God, sexting is automatically bad, bad, bad. So, in looking, so there was one film we saw, a Nymphomaniac, and
Oh,
so
yeah.
that's about we see the young girl in part one of the film, and she's highly sexed, and she's getting pleasure out of kind of squishing across a wet floor with her vulva on the floor. And then we see how this heightened libido causes her terrible problems throughout her life. But finally, the last scene that we see is she just sort of is true to herself and just says, I see how you all are trying to regulate me and change me so you can keep your values unchanged. And she said, I wouldn't want to be like you. I I value my erotic life. And that's sort of the end of the movie.
Wow,
Um,
very
yeah, and I think that's such a valuable point of view that it doesn't get articulated very often in our culture. I mean, everything is just about the problem sex causes, not how it contributes to our total health, to our cognitive processing, to our moods, to our relationships. And, it's really one of the best things going. So, one of my goals was really to try and bring that out. And but we had a very receptive group that I think did agree with that. And then just to look at that, the idea of, so that's the wild zone, is what people who aren't part of the mainstream know about life, that those mainstream conventional people don't know about because they don't experience it that way.
that sounds
And so,
fascinating.
and so it's really important to look at movies and films and books to see what artists are saying about that unarticulated point of view. And so I really wanted um, participants to go away thinking, wow, I need to pay more attention to the details and you know, to this as a cultural phenomenon, not just something that this individual is problematized by.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point and kind of different than what we see in the media in terms of, movies and news, how the media has a really negative impact on our sexuality. And you're saying, look at the positive points
Yeah,
of films, look at the positive films and what messages they give, and they can actually give a positive message about our sexuality. And actually, we can learn something from it, which is different than what we usually see.
exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So, so that was a perspective that was important to me, and I think also it helps those two sort of concepts, the contact zone, which is a geological um, term about how when plates bump into each other and there's, I don't know, magma and everything, the two geological the minerals actually transform.
Mm.
And so in I'm hoping that we left seeing that there's something to take from addictionology that we can't escape without being impressed with some of the values, some of the learning, some of um, the ways that they practice that many clients find very helpful,
Mhm.
and that we need to be changed, but also they need to be changed. And so the contact zone is where that happens, and the mineral that ends up is one that is forever changed by the conflict. That way, and how some of the movies were arguing for that very sex negative point of view, and the other one, the other point, some of the other movies were arguing for much more the sex positive one. And so we really need to see clearly how how these two different sort of teams are arguing, and so that we don't have to, buy either side 100%, that we can, kind of understand that we're in a state of transformation, in which sensitivity to all the possibilities will help us be more nuanced with clients, and also in our own thinking.
Sounds
So
really
yeah,
valuable. Yeah, it sounds really valuable.
so that those are the things I was interested in, and then of course in planning with Doug, planning. I guess we had been planning it for a year at the institute, so it was a very long term project, as they all are, and just gathering together people who are noted in the field, have different points of view, have different ways they approach it, either as a researcher, a theorist, or a practitioner, or some combination of all those things. And I was hoping that we could give people a sense of really privilege to really be with these people and hear their theories and their practices and everything, within the context of everything they were saying and how they were acting and who they were as people.
Mhm.
um, because I think that's so important. These aren't unconnected theories; they're connected to people like Joe Court. His whole story of being a sex addict himself, and then an addiction therapist, and then realizing, no, we need to use these sexual health principles.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely a wonderful privilege to be in the room, I'm sure, of all these amazing people and to hear all of their ideas and theories and how it can be applied across all different mediums.
Yeah, and I think that the way that Doug and Michael's the way they use the sexual health model with those 6 principles of sexual health, um, is so useful to sex educators. I mean, just to instead of saying just say no,
Yeah.
or even just say yes, go, well, here are some principles of sexual health that have been affirmed by the World Health Organization, CDC,
Right.
et cetera, our Surgeon Generals. And you might want to use these principles as a way of building your vision of what would be your ideal sex life,
Yeah,
rather than just acting without really having tools to think about what's going to work and what's fair to other people and things like that. Um, so, one of the things I took responsibility for was sort of being our host at the Brown School, because that's my home base,
and it sounds beautiful.
and to organize things in such a way that um, participants would be able to feel held and safe, and excited by, and all of that would just be, like an exciting adventure experience. And so sometimes either before I'm giving a new class, and I always have these goals, and I always think, oh my God, I don't know if it's gonna. Sometimes I think about it in terms of, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull this off. But what was meaningful to me was, I'm always thinking before something like a session starts or an institute starts, I'm thinking about it just from my responsibility. But what I really took away from it is, oh my gosh, the people who come bring so much to it that it shouldn't really even be a worry. Um, that it's it should just be an excitement, that it's sort of like having a party. But sometimes you worry, if I have a party, are people going to show up, and are they gonna let their hair down? um, but it was exciting to see how people really played off each other, listened very intently, shared stories, and and I think certainly I went away having a much fuller view of out of control sexual behavior, and also about how important pleasure is in this, and that we shouldn't throw pleasure away by using the addictionologist's point of view of, okay, you need to give up sex for 6 months or a year until you get under control. But rather, you really need to just start right away using these principles and making better choices. And that the pleasure that you continue to have is something that will help cure you, help heal you, help, um, will be nurturing while you're trying to grow. And whoever heard of growing without food?
Right.
Okay, so I was chair of the Professional Education Steering Committee for AASECT, and um, I was realizing more and more that we don't give CEs except for topics that are in our core knowledge areas, and sex addiction is not, and it's not because it's not represented in the DSM. It's not a real diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So I just made the policy decision with my committee that we would no longer offer CEs for that. But I felt like we needed to have like an educational experience to lay that all out, and to also help articulate a position that AASECT should take.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of like participatory action research to find out what that statement should be, how people felt about it, how we should handle it, etc. Um, and so I think that the institute was really moved us forward in our thinking and in our calmness about our decision not to offer CEs for it. I think it's just so important for us to use evidence-based practices and to have training that presents those for our members, because after all, our mission is to maintain the very highest standards in therapy, counseling, and education. And if we don't depend on evidence-based practices, we're really a little bit lost. So I'm excited about that, and I think that's going to be more and more AASECT's sort of way of doing things. When we see that we have an issue that we have some diverse opinion about, because we do have a lot of sex addiction therapists who are members. That one way of sort of clarifying our values and the way to go is to have an institute where we really explore the topic deeply.
And it sounds like that's what you guys did. It sounds like it went away
That's what we did.
really well.
Yes.